You're right to describe what happened to him as effectively a public execution. What it indicates is the grotesque intolerance of the fascist left. We have got to resolve not to be intimidated. I mean, Charlie Kirk is a modern martyr for free speech. I believe it is incumbent on all of us that we are not silenced. And if anything, we redouble our efforts to keep up the work that he began so well.
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail. Hello Tony, and g'day to all of our viewers and listeners. Great to be back. Today we'll be discussing the government's climate change report, the tragedy of Charlie Kirk, the government's increase in defence spending, plus we'll be taking some of your questions. Tony, great to be back with you today.
Thanks, Dan. Lovely to be with you.
All right, well, let's start on the issue of climate change. The government has released a so-called report as to the potential costs to our society from climate change, claiming that a 3 degrees in warming in Australia will result in some $500 billion in damage to property values. Now, I don't think this is believable in any way, shape or form. And it's very much in the tone of the typical fear-mongering and moral hectoring we get from this government. So they're setting the stage for their 2030 or 2035 emissions targets. Interested in your perspective and thoughts on how the debate's shaping up.
Plainly, Dan, they are trying to scare us into accepting a high target. They're trying to tell us that unless we go further, faster to reduce emissions, all these dreadful, dreadful things are going to happen. Well, let me begin by stating what I think is crystal clear. First, there is no climate crisis. And second, there is no energy transition. I don't think anyone could realistically say that anything is happening to our weather that hasn't happened hundreds of times before. Our worst drought was the Federation drought 120 odd years ago. Probably our worst fire was the Great Victorian Fire of 1851. Certainly we've had horrific floods throughout our recorded history, and our worst storm was Cyclone Tracy, at least in terms of damage to property and loss of life. So nothing is happening to our climate which is unprecedented. Once in a blue moon, we get what is in fact a record flood. For instance, Lismore had a genuine record flood a couple of years ago, but those floods in the Hawkesbury that we had a couple of years ago were relatively minor. The biggest flood we've ever had on the Hawkesbury was back in the 1860s. And it was 50% bigger than any of the recent ones. So this idea that we face climate catastrophe, unless we do what the government wants, it's bunkum, simple bunkum. The truth is, we're not going to meet the existing targets, and we shouldn't be setting new targets until we've met the existing targets, and we shouldn't set any targets unless we are absolutely clear about exactly how we're going to get there and quite confident about the costs. And the costs of getting as far as we've already got have been very, very high. We are deindustrialising, our power prices are through the roof, and to do any more than we're already doing is going to effectively destroy what's left of our energy security. It's going to badly damage agriculture. It's going to force people to sell their existing cars almost for nothing and buy expensive Chinese-made electric vehicles. So look, this is all bad news, and frankly, we shouldn't be doing it because, as the chief scientist, Professor Finkel, told us just a few years ago, nothing Australia does is going to make a difference anyway.
Is it frustrating for you, having led to a landslide victory on the back of getting rid of the carbon tax, that we're going through this again? And the reason I ask that is, I hear this refrain that net zero is popular, and I accept that it's popular if you have it in the abstract term of do you want to cut emissions and so forth. But the support for it is a mile wide and an inch deep, and you'll remember the ETS, the Emissions Trading Scheme, the precursor to the carbon tax, was popular with the public because there was bipartisan support and it wasn't contested until you contested it. Can you just, I guess, give us an insight into how you went about that argument and how critically important it was for you and the opposition at the time to give a contest on that matter?
Well, Dan, one of the points I've long made is that if climate is a moral issue, the Greens win. If climate is an economic issue, the coalition wins. And the truth is that it is an economic issue because everything we do in terms of reducing our emissions has an economic cost. And the more you want to reduce your emissions, the higher the economic cost is. And I think it's important to point out that every time the coalition has made emissions reduction and climate change a big issue in an election, we've done well. In the 2010 election, when Kevin Rudd was supposed to cruise to victory, we fought Labor to a draw by opposing his great big new tax on everything. In the 2013 election, we had a smashing win by saying that we would repeal the carbon tax. In 2019, when Matt Canavan led the charge against the then Labor emissions reduction target of 45%, we had a miracle win. Canavan does not get enough credit for his work during that election campaign on climate and particularly on the Adani coal mine in Queensland. So we shouldn't be scared of a contest here because the record shows that if you fight on this and you turn it into the economic issue, which it undoubtedly is, the coalition wins. So I'm encouraged by signs that the coalition is developing a bit of a backbone on this subject. I certainly don't think that we should have a hard and fast commitment to net zero by 2050. Yes, we can certainly have aspirational targets, but we shouldn't do anything which is going to destroy jobs, which is going to drive industries offshore, which is going to make us more dependent on China and therefore more strategically vulnerable, and which is going to further pressurise the cost of living that families face.
It's a really important point because in addition to that, 2016, the coalition performed poorly, as in 2022 and 2025. Now, in 22 and 25, the coalition's policy at a headline level was the same as Labor's, to have net zero. Now, yes, there were different means of doing that, but what I think is that net zero and going against net zero and providing an alternative is a vote winner for the coalition, and the coalition should be relishing this opportunity to have a contest on this issue, given that, as you say, the target back in 2019 was just a 45% target. Now they're going for a 60 or 70% target. So the target is higher and the economy is much worse and our society is more divided. Wouldn't this be the thing that you want to campaign on as the coalition, at least on the economic front?
Well, that's right. And look, it's not the only issue we face. We've obviously got all sorts of other economic issues. Our productivity is flatlining. Our strategic situation is perilous. We've got education sliding into indoctrination. So there are all sorts of issues that I think are ripe for the coalition to fight on. But this is critically important because the wrong policy here, it damages our economy, it imperils our national security, it plays into productivity. And I suppose if we tell ourselves lies on this issue, we will tend to tell ourselves lies on other issues. And we have been willfully self-deluded on this issue for a long, long time. There are many things that feed into climate, not just mankind's carbon dioxide emissions. And by far the best thing we can do is stay strong so that we can deal effectively with whatever comes, including any climate change that might take place.
You mentioned the sort of national security situation, which is deteriorating, This comes in the context of a recent announcement by the government that they're going to commit, well, what they say is $12 billion over 10 years, so $1.2 billion per year under the AUKUS agreement on essentially naval shipbuilding and the docking of nuclear power submarines. Now, that would get our defence spending to something like 2.7, 2.8% of GDP, which is still a very small spend, but I guess you could, if you're being charitable, say, well, at least it's a step in the right direction. Interested in your thoughts about whether this is just window dressing or whether there's going to be any substantive improvement under it.
It is effectively window dressing, Dan. Now, obviously, spending more money to improve our ability to host British and American nuclear submarines in Western Australia is important. Spending more money to develop our own domestic naval shipbuilding capacity is important. But on its own, this is really a very, very small change, and it's not nearly enough. I mean, essentially, the government needs to be saying to our military chiefs, if we had to fight in 6 months' time, what would we need? If we have to fight in 3 years' time, what would we need? If we have to fight in a decade's time, what would we need? And we need to be getting this equipment at the most rapid possible pace. And the trouble with what's happening here, and indeed in just about every other Western country except for Israel, and except for some of the countries of Eastern Europe, is that nothing is happening fast. We've talked about building up our munitions making capability, but it's not happening fast, and we tend to make an announcement one day and then walk it back the next day. The government is doing some good things. This deal that they're trying to do with PNG, an ANZUS-style agreement with PNG, is certainly a big step in the right direction, but we've got to get it across the line, and at the moment we've made the announcement but we haven't actually got the result. Now, I don't entirely blame the Prime Minister for this. Sometimes it is hard to get quick commitments from our Pacific friends and neighbours, but we just have to be absolutely relentless about everything, not just bits of paper and notional commitments, but much more importantly, bits of kit, the men and material necessary to defend ourselves and to help our allies if things go bad. Because as the Israelis have always known, and as the Ukrainians found out, when troubles come, they come to you as you are. That's why at any one time we have got to be ready for just about any reasonably foreseeable contingency, and we're not. On that note, I probably should add that I was very encouraged this morning when I turned on my television to see the King's speech in the presence of President Trump. He went out of his way to mention the importance of AUKUS. And I suspect this might be one of the very few times the President has heard of AUKUS, and it's good that our King has been able to bring very forcefully to the attention of the President an arrangement of the utmost significance and importance for Australia's long-term national security.
Do you think that AUKUS is going to survive the Trump administration? It appears now to be the case that Trump is, or the Trump administration is warming to it in a way that they weren't some months ago. What's your sort of take on the situation?
Well, Dan, because AUKUS, if it all comes to pass as it should, will be very good for the United States, very good for the United Kingdom, and very good for Australia, I think that everyone should want it to happen. The problem is that the first big step in AUKUS, other than the rotation of British and American submarines through Western Australia, the first big step in AUKUS is the delivery of 3 Virginia-class submarines to Australia. Now, the problem is America is not producing enough submarines quickly enough. And it's problematic, rapidly increasing the drumbeat of the US submarine program. One of the things that I would really want us to consider as a matter of extreme urgency, because this will add to the battle order as opposed to possibly subtract from the battle order, America's retiring 1 or 2 LA-class submarines every year. I would be amazed if a couple of years, maybe 5 years, maybe a decade of extra life couldn't be coaxed out of these very, very capable submarines. Why shouldn't Australia take over the next couple of LA-class submarines that retire, run them as operational training boats for 5 or 10 years? A, they would be available to fight as opposed to going off into a decommissioning yard. And B, it would actually give our sailors operational experience now, and it would put a nuclear-powered submarine under the Australian White Ensign now, because what we need is extra military capability now, not in 5 or 10 years or 15 years' time.
Well, I want to turn to, I guess, the main thing that's been happening in the world and in the US lately, which is the tragic death, assassination, or public execution, as I think is a more appropriate term, of Charlie Kirk. He was a voice of a generation and someone who lived and breathed the values of Western civilization and freedom of speech, and in a civilised manner took the debate on university campuses and elsewhere. And I think the reaction of many of those on the left has been berserk and completely and totally unhinged, and very truly the mask has slipped on so many who have revealed how inhuman they are towards their political opponents. I'm interested in your assessment of I guess, Charlie Kirk's life and legacy, and then also what this means for the United States political situation going forward.
Well, Dan, thank you for asking about Charlie Kirk, and I think you're right to describe what happened to him as effectively a public execution. To shoot someone in front of thousands of people, just shocking, evil, horrible beyond belief. I suppose what it indicates is the grotesque intolerance of the fascist left. The shooter and those who barracked for the shooter obviously are doing their best to intimidate people into silence, and I suppose by cutting down in such a bloody way someone who has been such an effective voice for freedom and for Western values and for American patriotism, deliberate, vicious act of intimidation. Charlie Kirk was a remarkable individual. I had the honour of meeting him once. Absolutely remarkable individual, and I was extraordinarily struck in the days after his death just how many young people have been touched by his message. I mean, amazing the people who I would never have thought had the slightest interest in political or cultural issues, who've mentioned how shocked they were, how moved they've been by Charlie's words and his life. So we have got to resolve not to be intimidated. I mean, Charlie Kirk is a modern martyr for free speech, and I believe it is incumbent on all of us who believe in the West, who cherish our history, who think that for all our faults and mistakes, Western civilization, particularly the English-speaking version of it, is the greatest cultural achievement of mankind thus far. I think it's incredibly important that we are not silenced, and if anything, we redouble our efforts to keep up the work that he began so well. My understanding is that there is a Turning Point Australia. My understanding is that Turning Point Australia has been absolutely flooded with messages and offers of help, and I really hope that on our campuses there can be brave, articulate people going onto campus and challenging the zeitgeist, saying to those who have drunk the leftist Kool-Aid, well, let's have the discussion. You put your point of view, we'll put our point of view. Let's challenge our assumptions, and let's see what emerges as the best possible position.
I think one of the issues here is too many on the left don't want to have a debate, and I think they've forgotten how to have a debate because they've got the commanding heights of the major cultural institutions and nodes of cultural production. And, you know, we've heard this line about how words are violence, as if to equate emotional so-called harm with physical violence. And, you know, this was the point that a lot of us made when they went after Trump in that way, which is there was that coordinated effort to deperson Trump by all the social media companies colluding and getting rid of him. And then we were told he's a fascist and much worse, and that his election would cause death and destruction. And the point that was made was, well, if they're going to say that about Trump and try to dehumanize him in that way, then there's likely to be consequences. And it creates a permission structure within which this behaviour can take place. I mean, I think that these institutions are, need to take their share of accountability for what's happened.
Exactly right on many levels, Dan. I mean, yes, the left does try to silence debate by, I suppose, labelling its opponents as fascists, Nazis, racists, whatever, or by appeals to authority. You can't talk about climate because the science, in inverted commas, is settled. So yes, the left does try to silence debate, and yes, the left does try to demonise its opponents. Now, disagreement is natural, and disagreement serves an important purpose. I mean, our legal system is based on two adversaries, as it were, in court, putting forward their best argument, and then the judge and, if needs be, the jury weigh it all and come to what they believe is truth beyond reasonable doubt. Now, that's how we advance, through point, counterpoint, new point, and disagreement might be wrong-headed. It might be based on incorrect assumptions, but in the end, normally, if you disagree with someone, it's not because that person is bad or immoral. It's because that person simply has a different viewpoint. And once we start dehumanising our opposition, then we do licence terrible things. And let's hope extremism generally looks itself in the mirror at this time, concludes that it doesn't like what it sees, and gets back to a degree of civility that we do tend to have lost.
Well, something else that Charlie Kirk was involved in is a conference called CPAC in the United States, the Conservative Political Action Conference, which has been running there for however long it is. And there's also an Australian chapter that's been running now for a number of years, and that's going to be held this weekend in Brisbane, and both yourself and myself will be able to give speeches and address the audience there. So I'm very excited about that. I think it's the biggest gathering of conservatives and those on the centre-right in Australia. So
other than perhaps a big Liberal Party gathering, Dan.
Well, I mean, would you call that centre-right these days? Or?
We can but hope.
So you'll be there. You're looking forward to it, I assume?
Look, Dan, I am. I think that CPAC has certainly energised a lot of people on the centre right, and I'm looking forward to the discussion up in Brisbane this weekend. And I certainly want to see people who love our country, want it to be its best. I want to see them channeling that patriotism and that enthusiasm in constructive directions.
And related to that, we've mentioned a couple of times your book on Australian history, which I think is a very significant contribution. I mean, to my knowledge, There is no former Prime Minister that's written such an expansive work. So we've got behind you there John Howard's masterful piece on the Menzies era, but yours is of the entire Australian history from settlement to basically the modern era, and that is available for pre-order. It will be released shortly, and there's also an accompanying documentary from Sky News, which is going to be up very soon, I understand.
Well, that's right, Dan. If we want to understand the present, and if we want to build the best possible future, we need to know where we've been, where we've come from. We need to know how our great forebears dealt with the issues of their day, because nul novum sub solum, in the end there is nothing new under the sun. And the more we know about the past, the better we will handle the present and the future.
Well, looking forward to that being released, and we'll put some links up in the description here about where you can go to get more information. So very much looking forward to that. Okay, so we'll move on now to some questions we've got from the audience. So there's three questions that I have picked out. Now, the first one you may have already covered off on earlier in the discussion, which is the federal government has resorted to more fear-mongering on climate change yet again. When will Australians wake up? This is the question there. Do you want to take that one? Or?
Well, the short answer is yes, and soon, I hope. Let's go to the next one.
All right. So this one is in relation to Victoria's Premier Jacinta Allen on a trip to China. And the question, or the statement here is, I am worried about the growing Chinese influence in Australia. What can be done about that?
Good question, and as I always try to do when talking about the China challenge in inverted commas, is make a very clear distinction between the current Chinese Communist government and the Chinese people, and indeed people here in Australia of Chinese background. So the current Chinese government, I think, is a menace to the wider world. They say that they are dead set on global domination by 2050, and when dictators say things repeatedly, you've got to take them seriously. So it's a huge problem. The Chinese people, of course, well, they're like people everywhere, mostly just wanting to get on with others to make a better life for themselves and their family, normally full of goodwill and trying to do the right thing, just as your average Australian is. So I have no argument with the Chinese people, but I have a very big argument with the current Beijing regime. And as for Chinese people here in Australia, well, we have a very long history of Chinese people here in Australia. Back in the gold rush days, at one stage, something like 10% of the settler population was Chinese. Now, many of them went back to China after the gold rushes, but many stayed. Senator Thomas Backup was in the Federation Parliaments. Trooper Billy Singh was our most fearsome sniper in the Great War. Trooper Yin Gan was one of the first ashore at Gallipoli. So, look, Chinese people have a long and honourable history here in Australia. I just wish that we didn't have this procession of Australian politicians to Beijing, not forthrightly putting forward Australia's interests and values, but basically engaging in a pretty undignified kowtow to a regime that's not worth it.
Okay, so the third and final question here, international front. Israel has bombed Qatar, which is a US ally, as some Hamas leaders are based there in Qatar. I think this has gone too far. Do you agree?
Well, respectfully, no. Qatar hosts a big American airbase, but Qatar walks both sides of the street. Qatar is probably the principal funder of Hamas, and if Qatar wanted to, it could have certainly done so much more to stop the terrorist threat, the existential threat to Israel. Israel is engaged in an existential struggle for life against apocalyptic Islamism, and if an attack on Hamas leaders in Qatar helps Israel win this absolutely necessary fight, so be it.
All right, Tony, well, thanks for taking the questions. And if you do have any questions, please email me at dwild@ipa.org.au, and I'll get to as many as I can with Tony. So, Tony, thank you for the time. Great to chat, and we'll catch up again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Dan.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.